On March 15, 2024, presidential elections began in Russia. A series of significant political events in Russia in recent years has attracted the close attention of the world community to the presidential elections that began in 2024, which will be held on March 15, 16 and 17. The current head of state, Vladimir Putin, who has been in power since 2000, according to the constitution, will be able to run for a new term. However, his possible re-election raises big questions amid domestic political turbulence related to the unpopular pension reform, protests in the regions and growing discontent with economic difficulties. Alternative candidates for the highest state post, of course, do not claim victory. They build their election strategies hoping to take an honourable second place. Meanwhile, protest sentiments are growing in society, fueled by the deterioration of the socio-economic situation of citizens against the background of Western sanctions. In the run-up to the elections, political life in Russia has noticeably intensified. The authorities are taking steps to clean up the information space from criticism, tighten legislation on the media and non-governmental organizations. At the same time, the role of Kremlin-controlled parties has increased. Administrative resources and propaganda pressure on the electorate through state channels are increasing. At the same time, the struggle for the right to represent the opposition in elections is heating up. For many years, the only significant opposition force in Russia was the Communists, led by Gennady Zyuganov. However, the internal party split and the struggle for influence between various factions have significantly weakened the party recently. Some of the Communists, dissatisfied with Zyuganov's long-term rule, left the party, and he himself lost his former charisma. As a result, the Communists risk losing their electoral base in working-class neighborhoods and industrial, single-industry towns due to internal contradictions. However, for a significant proportion of older voters, they remain the only opposition force. If we look at the situation in more detail, then according to the latest pre-election polls, Vladimir Putin may gain about 80% of the vote. This is less than in the previous elections, but it will still ensure his victory from the first round. But how real will this figure be? On the one hand, Vladimir Putin still enjoys high confidence among voters, especially in the regions. His policy aimed at strengthening sovereignty and stability in the country is supported by the majority. However, recently there has been an increase in discontent due to economic difficulties. In addition, during the pandemic and the special military operation in Ukraine, loyalty to the government has been shaken a little. In these elections, Putin will have rivals in the person of three candidates from the main parties of the systemic opposition: LDPR leader Leonid Slutsky, State Duma deputy from the Communist Party Nikolai Kharitonov, and head of the New People movement, Vladislav Davydenko. They promise to actively fight for votes, especially in large cities. Experts predict that each of them can get from 5 to 10% of the votes. At the same time, it is noted that Vladimir Putin's rivals have no real chance of a second round. However, they are able to compete for second place. According to political analysts, Kharitonov has the highest rating due to the electorate of the Communist Party, which the party has not yet completely lost, but Davydenko, with his little parliamentary experience, should also not be underestimated. His rating, after the removal of Nadezhdin from the presidential candidates, increased, thanks to his election program, which resonated with the electorate. This time, the authorities intend to ensure a record turnout of more than 70%. However, experts believe that it can actually stop at around 60%, given the increased level of apolitical citizens' indifference to the event, which is called elections, and disbelief in changes for the better, despite the fact that the head of the Central Election Commission, Ella Pamfilova, called the electoral system in the country a unique, independent public and state institution. A significant factor will be the position of United Russia, the party completely controlled by President Putin. At the moment, it lacks a clear ideological agenda, except for general slogans about stability. The party is openly associated by citizens with corruption and the enrichment of officials, but retains control over most regional authorities. It may well be that Putin will rebrand United Russia after the elections, changing the leadership and giving it a more patriotic rhetoric. The resignation of the government and the appointment of a new head of the cabinet of ministers is also predicted, who will have to improve the socio-economic situation in the country and draw up a new development strategy for the future incumbent president. Vladimir Putin himself is associated with many domestic and foreign policy problems: dissatisfaction with pension reform and tax increases, lower incomes and cuts in social programs, regional protests against corruption and poverty, as well as degradation of international relations due to the situation in Ukraine. On the eve of elections, Vladimir Putin, when addressing the Federal Assembly, forgot pensioners who quite reasonably expected a pension bonus. And pensioners, as is well known, are the main electorate of Vladimir Vladimirovich. There will be no lump sum payment to pensioners before the elections, but an increase in the minimum wage is promised. So a significant number of votes from pensioners will be lost in this regard. In addition, they have not yet forgotten about the pension reform, which was carried out immediately after the last elections in 2018. Therefore, according to various estimates, protest sentiments in Russian society are at a high level and continue to grow against the background of falling living standards. Opposition forces are being radicalized, and individual groups are calling for boycotts and mass protests. The range of common demands ranges from reviewing the outcome of pension reform to demands for peace. In key regions such as Moscow, St. Petersburg, Sverdlovsk and Nizhny Novgorod regions, signs of the formation of organized protest associations have been recorded. At the same time, the desire of the authorities to block their activities by force is obvious. On the internet and social networks, there is an increase in the number of anti-government communities regularly calling for protests. The protest mood in the country can be judged by the number of unauthorized rallies that took place. For example, in St. Petersburg after the death of politician Alexei Navalny, the most massive detentions of participants in unauthorized rallies in memory of the opposition politician took place in St. Petersburg, as well as his funeral, which took place in Moscow on March 1 and caused an unprecedented response from Muscovites. All this creates risks of destabilization of the situation during the election campaign, especially against the background of increasing foreign policy pressure on Russia, imposed sanctions and deterioration of trade and economic ties with the West. To sum up, it can be argued that the upcoming presidential elections will be truly crucial for the future of Russia. Supporters of the current head of state will make every effort to re-elect him for a new term, while strengthening control over the information space and political life in the country. There is a high probability of intensification of mass protests, especially in case of signs of electoral fraud or an aggravation of the economic situation. All this can provoke a harsh reaction from the authorities, suppression of dissent and restriction of civil liberties. In general, a high degree of tension in the political life of the country is predicted. Here, the responsibility of all political players for the preservation of civil peace and stability in Russia is great. Otherwise, the country will face an increase in turbulence and conflicts in society. Of course, the outcome of the elections will be decisive for the further trajectory of the development of the Russian state. Either it will continue to move along the path of further stabilization, or it will gradually democratize. The world community is also closely following this process, understanding its civilizational significance.